Tonight on Primetime Politics, Liberal turmoil.
He believes he's the right person for these times.
As parliamentarians return to Ottawa, questions swirl over the Prime Minister's future. But despite a brewing caucus revolt and dismal approval ratings, Justin Trudeau is making no indication of leaving. Why is he determined to stay? We will speak to two Ottawa journalists who have covered the Prime Minister extensively and spoken to his inner circle. Also,
so the campaign is over, but the work has just begun, hasn't it?
People were hungry for common sense change in British Columbia.
BC's undecided election. Provincial New Democrats currently have a one-seat advantage over the BC Conservatives, but with two NDP results headed for recount and neither party gaining a majority, no one is guaranteed a path to government. We'll hear what British Columbians are saying about the vote and look at the possibility of another election to decide a winner. And addressing the on-reserve child welfare system. The Assembly of First Nations rejects a nearly $48 billion deal with Ottawa, so what more needs to be done? This is Primetime Politics. Hello, everyone. I'm Michael Serapio. The Prime Minister was not in the House of Commons today, despite the fact this could be a very consequential week for Justin Trudeau. On Wednesday, a group of Liberal MPs will reportedly confront the Prime Minister at their weekly caucus meeting, expected to ask questions about his dismal polling numbers and his leadership. Last week, another veteran Liberal MP said it is time for the Prime Minister to step down as party leader, though Trudeau's defenders say he is still the best person for the job.
This is a guy who day after day after day gets attacked and punched and denigrated, and and he just steps up every day with the interests of the heart and in the interests of the country in his heart. And I have enormous amount of respect for him. The guy who showed up through the pandemic, the guy who's showing up through these incredibly difficult times in the world. Look, there's no incumbent government that's got it easy. The easy thing for him to do would be to walk away, right? But the challenges are too big, and I think the reason he stays is because he believes he's the right person for these times, and I believe that too.
Well, joining us now to talk about this are Susan Delacourt, journalist and columnist with the Toronto Star, and Stephen Maher, journalist and author of the best-selling political book, The Prince, The Turbulent Reign of Justin Trudeau. Hello to both of you.
Hi, nice to be here.
Listen, let's begin with this caucus revolt. And I'll get you to start us off here, Susan, because, as we said, on Wednesday, we're expecting this confrontation to happen during the caucus meeting. Just how consequential, how big of a revolt are we talking about here?
Well, I'm finding it hard to figure that out because, I've covered past revolts before, and this one is weird in that we've been expecting MPs to confront the Prime Minister going back to, summer of 23. I went down to London to that caucus meeting. We thought for sure it would happen then. It didn't happen when they all went out to BC this year. So why now? And what is the event that has triggered it? I had thought there were events before now that would. So I'm still trying to, I know this isn't a great journalistic answer, but I'm still trying to figure out how real this is, because it seems like Justin Trudeau weaves this kind of magic where suddenly he's in a room with them and everybody loses their voice. So will it be a letter presented to him in caucus in front of the others? Will somebody go to the media, or will this all just fade away? Any of those bets are on right now.
Okay, so something we're watching, although, Stephen, in terms of the major question being asked here, because with or without that magic that Susan's talking about, here you have a Prime Minister who has been trailing in the polls and trailing badly by 20 points for over a year now, and he's being questioned whether or not he should still be leader, both within his caucus and Liberals outside his caucus. So you, who have worked on this book, why does he choose to stay? Why doesn't he not move on when really the political calculus doesn't seem to foretell great things for him going down into another election?
Well, he's got an extraordinary confidence. One of his former cabinet ministers described it as being like a superpower. And if you look at his political career, he repeatedly, over and over again, has, I don't know if I would say triumphed, but prevailed after people were counting him out. If you consider that even the fact that he's prime minister, when his qualifications for that, aside from his family connections, were his experience as a former high school teacher and a backbench member of parliament, it was his confidence that thrust him to his current position, and it sustained him through great difficulties, through a boxing match, through various scandals, blackface and SNC Lavalin. He's been a fighter. He sees himself as a fighter. I believe this situation is different because he's now fighting gravity, this kind of seemingly immovable public fatigue with him. And he's bringing the same attitude to that he brought to earlier circumstances where there was a way for him to prevail. I don't see him prevailing this time.
Don't see him prevailing. And I wonder, Stephen, staying with you, I wonder whether or not he should be looking closely at what happened in British Columbia this past weekend, because here's David Eby, the NDP leader, facing possibly being pushed out of government over a lot of the same criticisms and issues that Trudeau is being criticized about: affordability, housing, crime. How worried should the Prime Minister be about the BC experience if he faces the same kind of criticisms?
Well, I think he is likely taking heart at BC because the BC NDP, the incumbents there are still holding on, whereas, and they received nearly half the vote, where it's projected in all the polls that the Liberals would receive 26% of the vote if there was a federal election now, which would see them wiped out. So he may be looking at BC and saying, look, I've got a hope. But I do not believe that there's the same kind of fatigue with Eby as there is with Trudeau. I think it would be hard to exaggerate how many Canadians just are tired of him and want him to go away. I'm in Ottawa today, but I'm normally resident in Atlantic Canada. And I think it's interesting that this rebellion seems to be centered in that area, which was once so warm and welcoming to him. And now you have an MP like Sean Casey in Charlottetown coming out and taking what's an extraordinary step when you think about it, given that Sean Casey, presumably wants to hold that seat. He's now put himself in the position where he's going to have to campaign and say, I don't think my candidate should be prime minister, but I'm still running for office anyway. So the people who are opposed to him are saying so, I believe, because they're getting that from the public.
Mm-hmm. Susan, you talk about this magic that Trudeau weaves whenever he's in front of his fellow caucus members. I'm wondering how much of that has to do with the fact that there is no heir apparent if Trudeau were to step aside.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I think they've been watching, and I think we should watch closely what's going on in the United States, because they replaced a leader, and, we're going to see in about 2 weeks whether that worked. And I think that might have some influence on Trudeau's thinking. I think if Trump wins, the chances are bigger that he'd want to stick around and fight Trump and Poilievre. But I think if Kamala wins, there may be something there for them to say, and again, I'm just guessing here, but there may be something in there for them to say, okay, look, they pulled off a switch, but there is no, the comparison ends there, as you say, though, because there is no heir apparent. Mark Carney is seen as that, but I've been cautioning people, do not see him as the Paul Martin to the Jean Chrétien. This is not the same kind of fight. There are others who will vie for Trudeau's job. Christy Clark has said now, I'm sure we could rattle off names of others, but none of them are, household names and certainly not charismatic.
Mm-hmm. Now, of course, there is a lot of focus on the Wednesday caucus meeting, Stephen, but the Prime Minister will also be looking at a cabinet shuffle now that we know that several of his cabinet ministers will not be running for re-election. Do you think that shuffle will serve to silence critics who may otherwise want Trudeau to step aside?
That's the calculation. I was doing some math recently. There's 153 Liberal members of Parliament, 38 cabinet ministers, 38 parliamentary secretaries, and I think 20-some committee chair people and a handful of House officers, you end up having only about 50 true backbenchers, people who don't receive some kind of a stipend from the government. That's a fairly small group to hold a rebellion. And if he can get some more of them on side by dangling a cabinet position, could that take the steam out of this process? The news broke about this while he was in the air. Now, once he came back, he and his people were able to make moves and apply pressure and twist arms. I don't believe it has killed the revolt, but we won't really know how much steam they've been able to take out of it until we see what happens on Wednesday.
Susan, what do you think about this possible cabinet shuffle? How much do you think that will blunt the criticism against the Prime Minister?
Yeah, I have an old joke is, what do you call liberals who don't get into cabinet? Anonymous sources. And
God love them.
Yes, thank you, anonymous liberal. So right now they're, I don't want to portray it as craven, but I'm sure they're going to be, if there is a confrontation on Wednesday, there will be a lot of those people, the numbers that Steve names, who are saying, should I yell at the Prime Minister or should I get into cabinet? And I think that will be going on.
Okay.
Wouldn't be human if they didn't.
Well, of course, we're going to watch as this is the start of a consequential week for Justin Trudeau. Susan Delacourt, Stephen Maher, thank you for this.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Well, to British Columbia now, where the results of Saturday's provincial election are still undecided. As things stand right now, though, David Eby and his BC New Democrats have been elected in 46 ridings. The BC Conservatives under John Rudstad have been elected in 45 ridings, and the BC Green Party, well, that has been elected to 2 seats. But those numbers are not guaranteed, as 2 ridings in the NDP column will go to a recount, which means things could flip in favor of the BC Conservatives. Here's what we heard from both the NDP and Conservative leader late Saturday night.
We got to do better. And that was our commitment to British Columbians. We got to do better, and we will do better.
If we're in that situation of the NDP forming a minority government, we will look at every single opportunity from day one to bring them down at the very first opportunity and get back to the polls.
Well, joining us now is Mo Amir, political analyst and host of Van Color. Hello once again, Mo. Thanks for being here again.
Hello, so nice to see you. I got to admit, I have a bit of an election hangover, even though I didn't have a lick of alcohol the entire weekend. It's just, it's been a lot.
Yeah, pure adrenaline, I'm sure. I've been there. I totally understand. Listen, you look at these results, and we always knew it was going to be a close race, but this is a bit crazy. Are you at all surprised by the final seat count at this point?
To be completely honest with you, no. I think a lot of analysts were saying that a BC NDP minority government was very much in the books. But I was surprised on election night because we had basically reached a stalemate where Elections BC had said, they had stopped counting, even though there was a very small amount of ballots left. So no, I don't actually find this to be surprising, but I do find the events of the evening of election night to have been a little surprising in the fact that we kind of stopped and said, okay, we're going to finish the initial count the next day. And certainly you have a couple of ridings that are still up for contention in terms of recounts and factoring in mail-in ballots, about 49,000 mail-in ballots, in fact.
What do you think prevented that NDP minority from happening?
I think there was a great underperformance in Surrey, particularly. I think the BC Conservatives really did well in Surrey. They were very competitive, even if they didn't win a seat like Surrey City Centre, which was touted to be an NDP safe seat. So I think the BC NDP really took some licks in Surrey and even in Richmond. In Richmond, the one seat that the BC NDP did hold, they were really bolstered by a former BC United candidate who was an independent candidate, Jackie Lee, who some would argue actually split the vote in Richmond. So they would have got swept otherwise, and we could have been seeing a much different result.
Yeah, different result. Although as successful as the Conservatives were, they still failed to actually get a majority of British Columbians on side with them. Why is that?
We can attribute a lot of things to the Conservatives not, taking it over the line. They were not really that great in Vancouver. They held one Vancouver seat, Vancouver-Quilchena, but there were two seats that were leaning Conservative, particularly Vancouver-Langara and Vancouver-Yaletown, and the BC NDP ended up winning those seats. So I think they didn't make a great break into Vancouver City Centre, but also in the Tri-Cities, Port Coquitlam, Port Moody, you did see some underperformance there from the BC Conservatives as well.
Now, I know we were talking about this off camera, but I'm going to ask you on camera here about the balance of power, because that does, at the end of the day, sit with the Green Party. They have 2 seats, which in a normal parliament, a legislature may not amount to a lot, but this time around could amount to a lot in terms of balance of power. But are they in any mood at all to build a coalition, for example, with the NDP, as it seems that a coalition with the Conservatives is not really something that the Greens would be in tune with?
It does kind of feel like 2017 all over again, where we were in a very similar situation. However, I would have been inclined to say that no, the BC Greens would not be willing to create some sort of coalition if Sonia Furstenau was still the leader. But Sonia Furstenau actually ended up losing her seat in Victoria Beacon Hill to NDP Cabinet Minister Grace Lohr. So we don't really know what the future is with the leadership of the BC Greens. But the fact that you now have 2 rookie MLAs representing the BC Greens, they might be more willing and incentivized to actually work with the BC NDP, because I'm not sure if they necessarily want to go to an election right away.
Okay, so and I think the question is being asked, given the results that we're looking at, Mo, how likely is perhaps another election sooner rather than later? How likely is a runoff vote?
I don't think it's that likely. We know that the BC Conservative leader, John Rustad, has said that he wants to bring down this government at the first available opportunity. He's really galvanizing his base. I think he's doing that in a ploy for self-survival as the leader of the BC Conservatives, but he doesn't have the numbers to do so, and I don't see the Greens necessarily working with him to do that right away. This is something that maybe happens next year, the year after. Of course, with minority governments, there's always instability. But in terms of an immediate, sending British Columbians immediately back to the polls, I just don't see it. And I don't think the Conservatives, despite maybe wanting to go to another election, have the numbers to do so.
Okay. Well, you know what? Here's my key takeaway, Mo. British Columbia politics, never boring. It wasn't boring this past weekend. So listen.
It's the Wild West. It's the Wild West.
On the other side of the Cordelia. Mo Amir, thank you for the time.
Always a pleasure. Thank you so much.
While we were away last week, a momentous decision was made by a special meeting of the Assembly of First Nations, the vast majority of chiefs voting to reject a nearly $48 billion package to address the on-reserve child welfare system.
Draft resolution number 1 does not carry, so is defeated.
Now, as you hear, the decision was met with thunderous applause, even though the settlement agreement aimed to address past wrongs and also provide funding to reform the child welfare system on reserve. Still, it was deemed to be not enough, though some of those who were at the special meeting cautioned against turning their backs on the deal.
Scuttle this deal if you want. Go ahead. I'm up here upset because I think that's what's going to happen. Go ahead. Then what? If you think it's that easy to just go and get another agreement, we've been fighting since 2007. We've been there in the trenches.
Well, joining us right now is Cindy Blackstock. She is the Executive Director of the First Nations Child and Family Caring Society. She helped initiate the complaint back in 2007 that the settlement agreement was hoping to address. Cindy and Ms. Blackstock, thank you for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure.
Listen, I understand your organization did not sign this agreement that the AFN was voting on last week. So perhaps we should start with why this agreement was not enough.
Well, it really was a key piece around the security of the money. It was advertised as 47.8, but closer scrutiny showed that really this was a year-by-year agreement that gave the government a lot of discretion. Number two, the implementation really matters because we have done a lot of work with First Nations and their service providers to make sure that every dollar maximizes benefit for First Nations children. And there was a severe departure from that evidence here that put the discrimination at high risk of recurring. And the final thing that was kind of really a concern to us is that the governance over this thing would happen by a secret committee. Secrecy is never good when we're talking about First Nations children across the country. And it didn't provide for the discrimination to stop after another 9 years. This agreement was only for 9 years, and it'll expire, and then you got to keep your fingers crossed that First Nations kids don't suffer. That's not good enough.
I hear your concerns, but of course we just heard Carolyn Buffalo, and she did warn, and she's not alone. She warned against turning your backs on an agreement like this. Again, the money is one thing, as she said, not easy to come by, and she says to community members that, you know, this was no easy process. So what do you say to people like her that feel that a huge chance for compensation and reform has now been lost?
Well, you know, I really honor her and respect her. She's done a lot of great work on Jordan's Principle. But there was, I think that they weren't informed properly because the view was that this was going to somehow address the compensation, that was going to get in the way of the compensation that Carolyn and others have fought so hard for. That was not what this meeting was about. So to give them some peace, they're going to get their compensation. It's a separate, entirely separate matter. What this was about is making sure that discrimination stops and does not recur. And negotiation is one pathway. We actually have legal orders against the government to require it to stop discriminating. And what we need to do is negotiate a deal that goes above those legal orders instead of really below those legal orders, as this deal did in many cases.
Mm-hmm. Except that, you know, and I hear what you're saying, that you hope the negotiations go above those legal orders. But in the negotiating of this with the AFN, the government, the Prime Minister, you know, we have here a Prime Minister who has said that there is no more important relationship than the relationship with Indigenous peoples. But the next time around, if there is an election and if the polls are correct, it will not be this Prime Minister, not this government negotiating. So I hear what you're saying about hoping to do above and beyond what the court is saying must be done. But does it at all worry you that when this comes to the table again, it may be a completely different government that you're dealing with?
Right. All changes in government worry me. I've seen discrimination across all changes in government. And so we need to make sure that whatever is achieved for First Nations children cannot be undone easily by any future government. And that's why having legal orders is really important. The draft agreement as it was structured allowed every year government to address the funding levels by introducing required approval processes, which were undefined in the agreement. So Canada could lower that amount by just introducing one of these. And it was very hard to enforce that agreement the way that it was drafted. All the tribunal's orders would disappear, the tribunal would disappear, and there was this alternative dispute resolution mechanism. But the key thing is it couldn't order Canada to spend more money if more money was needed to stop the discrimination.
So where would you like this to go next then? What would give you some comfort that in saying no to what was on the table, that you will be able to get something better down the road?
Well, number one, the tribunal's orders are still in place. So this isn't a zero-sum game. About 45 billion of this is kind of addressed in the tribunal's orders. So we have that will continue. And the chiefs decided to really put in place a new process to make sure that it's transparent, it's accountable, it's evidence-based, and that First Nations leadership and their experts are at the table. That's the way it should have been done. That's the way the chiefs directed it ought to have been done in 2022, but that wasn't followed through. So we're resetting, and we're going to build on all the good work that's done and get this thing home through the finish line in the next few months.
Next few months or next few years?
No, I think it'll be the next few months, Michael, because we really have done a lot of the evidence gathering with public finance experts over at the Institute of Fiscal Studies and Democracy. We have a lot of input from First Nations communities and their service providers. So I think we will have something to be able to present to the leadership for their decision making in the not too distant future. That's going to be the work order by the chiefs.
Cindy, I always appreciate the time. Thank you for this. That is Cindy Blackstock.
Thank you very much.
Well, time now for a look at what else happened in politics today. MPs are holding an emergency debate tonight, requested by the NDP leader Jagmeet Singh. The debate focuses on allegations that agents of the Indian government engaged in violent crimes and foreign interference in Canada. Singh today also moved a motion calling for the creation of a Canada-India Parliamentary Committee, but that motion failed to get the required unanimous approval.
It is something that's truly a threat to all Canadians. When people are being extorted, when guns and gangs are involved and bullets are flying, everyone is impacted. When a foreign government's hiring and instructing criminal gangs in Canada to go out and engage in violence, that is a threat to all Canadians.
Meanwhile, we are keeping an eye on developments in New Brunswick, the election this evening. Polls close at 8 p.m. Atlantic. It is, at the time of this recording, expected to be a close race between the Liberals, led by Susan Holt, and Blaine Higgs, Progressive Conservatives, who are vying for a third term in office. We'll have more analysis and reaction tomorrow as we track the results. And finally, the Alberta government is announcing over $100 million in support for interim housing in Jasper, where July wildfires destroyed roughly 30% of the town. Under the plan, 250 homes will be constructed and support essential service workers who are rebuilding the community. The province expects the first units to be ready for January. Well, earlier today I did speak with Jason Nixon. He is the Alberta Minister for Seniors, Community and Social Services. And as we talked about this new government initiative to help Jasper rebuild, he also wanted to make it clear Jasper is still welcoming visitors from across the country and around the world. Now, I think as well, the very fact that you're paying this to a rent that will be at market rate, given affordability issues these days, as you say, as well as the economic challenge in terms of supply on the ground, how will you determine what exactly is market rate?
Well, we'll work through what is the market rate for 1 and 2 bedroom units based on what we're building in Jasper. We know we have the ability to do that. We'll probably end up being a little bit less than market rate. But what is really key is that we have to charge rent. I mean, that is the rules under both federal and provincial emergency standards when you're dealing with an insurable disaster. The challenge isn't so much about lack of insurance that we sometimes see on things like floods in Alberta. People are insured. There isn't as much underinsured as we see in other disasters. The challenge is really just having stock and the ability to be able to provide a place for people to live. So we're pretty comfortable with this model, and we've been in close contact with insurance companies to be able to make sure that what we're looking at fits with what they intend and are able to pay.
And again, that is the Alberta Minister Jason Nixon. To see our full conversation and to find out more about Alberta, its government's plan to build housing for support workers, you can go to our website or watch the full interview on our YouTube page. And that is our program for this Monday. I'm Michael Serapio. For everyone here at CPAC and Primetime Politics, thank you for watching. We're back tomorrow evening. Until then, take care.